fresh and exciting, something to get into. Yes, that's right. Anyway, come on in. Frank, you feel comfortable praying us in? Thank you very much, Frank, and welcome everyone. And it's early January, and we were enjoying the warm weather, and then suddenly the the warm weather is vacationing somewhere. It's not too bad, but it's chilly. We had to get our jackets out again. Anyway, welcome everyone here in the auditorium and online. We are continuing our journey through the Gospel of Luke, and we are working our way through chapter 10. We're actually picking up at verse 25. And to put things kind of where we are, kind of pick up where we left off, Jesus is now on the road to Jerusalem. He's been to Jerusalem before, but this is the journey that will take him to Jerusalem, and that week of acclaim ending up with rejection and being crucified. So this is the the closing end of his earthly ministry. Anyway, Luke inserts a story here from that episode. Verse 25, uh, Luke tells us, on one occasion, an expert in the law, a scholar, a scribe, and that's an expert in the law of Moses. So this is someone who, by most standards, was a good, upright Jew. He was an expert in all things Jewishness, all things religious, all things legal, in terms of holding up and satisfying the law of Moses. And in one of these scrambles that Jesus is having with followers and onlookers and so forth, he gets up, and Luke says he stood up to test Jesus. And if you read that, your first thought is, this is a guy who is, he's looking for a rumble. He wants to take down Jesus. He wants to be, he's going to be antagonistic. Well, not necessarily. If you look at the Greek here, the original Greek that gets translated testing Jesus, doesn't necessarily imply ulterior motives. The guy's not being mean or evil. Basically, uh, he's asking what basically is a sincere question. It's kind of like your average college student who's visiting with his professor, and he wants to understand, have a little bit more insight, uh, probing, and so with an honest and sincere question. He asked, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? How do I get from here to there? How do I get from this temporary life that we know, earthly life that we know will end, to the eternal life that will never go away, and where I'm in the presence of God?" Well, Jesus answers his question with a question of his own. And that's not necessarily being cagey or coy or anything like that, but sometimes that's the best way to have a conversation like this. Where are you coming from? What's on your mind? Let's narrow down to the real nugget that that you're really concerned about. Because that's how a lot of conversations like this start out. They kind of circle around what the main issue is, and it takes a while to get to what the real question is. And so that's what Jesus is doing. So he says, okay, in essence, if you really want to know uh, what inheriting eternal life is about, look to the law, look, see what it says. So he asked, what is written in the law? That is the law of Moses. How do you read it? And the scribe replies, verse 27, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Two rules, two commandments that are found in the law of Moses, and essentially embody the whole idea of the law of and what and God's will. Jesus replies, "You've answered correctly. Do this and you will live." Gee, it sounds so simple. Okay, yeah, love God. I can do that. Love your neighbor. Love him the way I love myself. Yeah, I can do that. Really? What Jesus is saying, and and in fact, as the conversation goes on, it's a question of what must I do to inherit eternal life? What are the things I can do? What's that checklist out there of items, things to do that I need to check off? Because when I have checked every box, I know that I've made it. And maybe he was hoping Jesus would provide that laundry list, the to-do list of things to justify yourself before God. And Jesus says, well, just two things. Love God, love your neighbor. Do this, and you'll live. Do this perfectly. Do this to fulfill the law of Moses. And yes, you'll have eternal life. Gee, I wonder how many people over history, throughout history, I wonder how many people today have fulfilled those laws perfectly. The answer would be, and not including Jesus, goose egg. No one. Good heavens. And as the conversation goes on, you can kind of see the mindset of this young man who's trying to get an answer that will satisfy him, satisfy what his concept of what God requires of him. So verse 29, the man wanted to justify himself. Okay, those two rules, those I'm supposed to uphold them, fulfill them. How do I qualify? When do I know that I have fulfilled these expectations? And it's interesting, the question that he asked in terms of how do I qualify for this? What things do I need to do to justify these expectations? His question is, who is my neighbor? And you kind of you read that and you kind of get the sense is he assuming that he's already satisfied the God part, loving God? Because he doesn't ask about that. That would seem to be the greater issue. But maybe his mindset is, well, I'm a Jewish official. I'm a scholar in the law. I'm an expert. I know what the law is about. So I know this thing about satisfying God. But you're bringing up now loving your neighbor. Okay, well, Who's my neighbor? Because there's so many people out there. It's like the guy who says, I love mankind. It's people I can't stand. It's because there's all sorts of folks out there that really rub you the wrong way, or they're part of the wrong crowd. You know, Lord, you really don't mean those, do you? And who's my neighbor? Is is there a list that qualifies where I love this person and do good to them? This person, this person, this person, but not that person. He's not. He's off the list. That's the mindset, and the qualifications and so forth. Um, Jesus, of course, is referring to perfect love, perfect actions, something that no human being can do. The Jews realized this eventually. There is no way that any of us can fulfill the law of Moses, which is the law of God, and fulfill God's expectations. Maybe we need to water down the expectations, which is kind of sort of where we got the Pharisees and their 613 rules. Yeah, obey these 613 rules and you will have satisfied the law. That's the way of thinking, really. Even when some of those rules went into contradiction with or contradicted one another, looking for loopholes. Some of us may remember old-timey comedian by the name of W.C. Fields. When some of us were younger, there was a revival about the popularity of W.C. Fields. For the younger folks who are not quite sure who am I talking about, Google him on YouTube. They probably have some excerpts from his movies, but he was a comedian, and he had this persona of this very sardonic, cynical kind of guy who had run-ins with all sorts of weird and cranky people, and he would respond to them in a very weird way. He also, his persona was he had a drinking problem, which unfortunately was also true of W.C. Fields in real life. He did not live all that long. He did not live into old age. I think he died in his 50s or 60s. But there's a story about W.C. Fields that he was in the hospital, probably one of his final stays in the hospital, because he was getting sick and sicker, and he would eventually die. Uh, and he was not known for being particularly religious. But one day, a friend walks in to his hospital room, and he finds W.C. Fields reading the Bible. Whoa, now that's something I thought I'd never see. Hey, W.C., what you reading the Bible for? And he said in his own particular way, looking for loopholes, my friend, looking for loopholes. And that's basically what the line of Jewish thought had devolved into. Okay, let's take the law of Moses and let's look for loopholes. Let's look for those exceptions and those situations, and especially those people that will excuse us from carrying out certain things that we know God is commanding quite clearly in the rules that he's laid down. And that's that kind of mindset that's traced here with this young man. How do I qualify for eternal life? Jesus, you've talked about loving my neighbor as myself. Who is my neighbor? And the unsaid thought is, because there's some people I really don't love all that much. I'd prefer not to have anything to do with them. And so Jesus tells a little story. It's called a parable, but when you see the language here, you kind of get the sense this is more, and some of the details, it looks like this is more than just a story. This may have been a true event. This may have happened in real life. But anyway, Jesus said, verse 30, a certain man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. Not an unusual thing. The distance from Jerusalem to Jericho, about 17 miles. We're so used to driving anywhere that we go. We think 17 miles, I'll be there in half an hour. Well, no, they're walking. And furthermore, this road from Jerusalem, and you know Jerusalem is on top of a mountain. Jericho is close to the river, so uh, there's a drop in altitude from 2,500 feet to 800 feet. So quite a drop. Not only that, the road is very rocky. It's winding. Lots of places where you just didn't know what was around the corner. Great place to get ambushed. Great place for if you're making this a western, where the bushwhackers would be hiding out, and obviously this is what happened to the poor man. He gets jumped on the way down to Jericho. Very, very dangerous. And they stripped him of his clothes, they beat him, and they went away. And they really beat him because Jesus said they left him half dead. Well, he's in bad shape. Yeah, this left for dead. He's been robbed of all his possessions. Nobody knows who he is. And then three people come upon him. First one, verse 31, a priest happened to be going down the same road. And when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. Jesus makes the point. These are more than just supposedly upright, good Jews. They were Jewish officials. We all know what a priest is or was in that context. The priest was in charge of certain duties, handled certain duties at the temple. Among other things, he had to be very aware of what the law said about uh, regarding situations like this. Levite, kind of in the same pool, not quite the same thing as a priest, but the Levite was basically the office help. The Levite assisted the priest in taking care of various duties and maintenance things around the temple. Anyway, these two guys, woulda, coulda, shoulda, responded to this poor man and the situation he was in, but they didn't. They went their way. Not only went their way, they apparently, as soon as they saw what had happened, saw what condition he was in, they made haste to get away and to walk around him as far away as possible. I don't want to get involved. Well, you can probably think of all the reasoning that was going through their head. Let's assume that they just were not so cold and callous to say they have no regard for a situation there. Maybe they felt really badly for him. And if they felt badly, I mean, if their conscience was stricken, you can think of all the rationalization that was going through their heads. Oh, it's too dangerous to stop here. Man, you know what they do, what these robbers will do. They'll beat someone up, and then they'll pretend to be a victim in the road. They'll lie on the road as a decoy. They'll hope that someone will stop to look at them. And as soon as you do that, you'll get attacked. I can't afford to have that happen. Or there's no time to stop. I'm on a schedule. I got to get home to Jericho as soon as I can. We know that most of the priests did not live in Jerusalem, but they came to Jerusalem on a rotation basis throughout the year. And maybe he was headed home. Maybe he wanted to get home in time for supper. Maybe he had something urgent, pressing business at home, like rearranging a sock drawer. Hey, that's or cleaning out the lint trap on his dryer. These things that just will not wait. I got to get home and do that. Religious duties. Hey, if I touch this guy, especially if I touch him and he's dead, I'll become unclean. I'll have to go a whole day and abstain from any kind of godly things. And I'm sure God doesn't want that to happen to me. Maybe he was thinking, poor man, wish I could help him. gee, too bad I skipped that first aid training that they had at the temple. I could have been a big help here, but I can't do it. Maybe he thought, this guy brought it on himself. He shouldn't have been traveling alone. Whatever he was doing, he he attracted these people who beat him up. Or maybe he had this final saving grace. I can't do anything for him right now, but I'll pray for him. I'll pray for someone to come and help. Well, fortunately, someone does come and help, and let's see who it is. Verse 33. A Samaritan. And your translation may read a certain Samaritan. You know, when Jesus uses that word certain, that basically means he's not talking about parenthetical or fictional people. He's talking about real people. A certain Samaritan, as he traveled, came to where the man was. What's this big deal about a Samaritan, especially in opposition to these two Jewish officials who passed him by and did nothing? Somebody does stop, and he's a Samaritan. What's the significance of Samaritans, especially with the Jews? They were like cats and dogs. It's like oil and water. They just did not mix. They didn't get along. We've talked about the reasons why. We mentioned a few weeks ago, or just a week or two ago, that if you were a righteous Jew, you lived in the Galilee area of Israel, and you had to go to Jerusalem or anywhere in Jerusalem on the south side of the country or the province. In between lay the area of Samaria. Rather than go straight through, lots of Jews would travel outside. They would go around. They would take the long way home. They would take the loop 360, if you will. I'd rather do that than go straight through this God-forsaken, unholy place and contaminate myself. That's how much Jews hated Samaritans, and probably the other way around. Lots of animosity between the two groups. But who of all people finally stop and take a look at the man and actually do something? Jesus said he came to where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He had compassion. This man's in trouble. He's hurt. If I don't do something, he may actually die on me. So he went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Oil and wine. It sounds weird to us, but that was actually good medical response. The wine had alcohol in it, and in this basis, it acted as an antiseptic, could clean out kill some of that bacteria in his wounds. The oil, basically olive oil, very all-purpose kind of substance. You could eat it, you could clean with it, you could use it for medical purposes if you needed to. In this case, the oil acted as basically soothed those spots where he had wounds, maybe even open wounds. So he gives him first aid. Then he put the man on his own donkey, which meant that the Samaritan at this point had to walk rather than ride, but he was willing to do that. The wounded man, was in no shape to be walking himself. And he brought him to an inn, took care of him. The next day, he took out 2 denarii. A denarius was basically essentially a day's wages. So he chipped in basically a third of whatever money he had earned for the week. 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, look after him, and when I return, I'll reimburse you for any extra expense. Here, I've got to go on and do my business, but if you'll look after him, he's pretty much on the road to recovery here, but he needs looking after. He needs tending to, take care of him, feed him, whatever, until he's on his feet again. Here's some money to pay for the expenses. I'll come back and check on you, and if you had to spend any extra money, no questions asked, I'll reimburse you. Wow. All this for a guy he had never seen before. All this for a guy from the other tribe, the hated tribe, the tribe that any righteous group of people would say, I have nothing to do with them. They're the enemy. They are not my friend. Have nothing to do with them. So, of all these people, of these three people, Jesus asked, verse 36, which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers, who not only could say that he was a good neighbor, but proved it by his actions? The expert in the law replied, and look at his response, the one who had mercy on him. You wonder what tone of voice he said and how loud he said it. The one he. Yeah, could you speak up? I can't hear you. The one who had mercy on him. Can't bring himself to say the Samaritan. He has to refer to him in a roundabout language. But Jesus' point has been made. He has driven it home. Jesus told the man, go and do likewise. Don't say you're a good neighbor. Don't just say you're a good neighbor. Don't just say, I love everybody around me, but prove it. When the situation arises and someone needs help, someone needs your help, you need to respond. If you are a man of God, if you are a man of God, if you want to be part of that kingdom that lives forever and has eternal life, this is what you do. This is what you need to do, because that's what Jesus would do. That's what God would have you to do. And so a few more verses here, and then we're done with chapter 10. Jesus and his disciples continue on their way, and they came to a village, which we know in other passages is Bethany. It's not about 2 miles away from Jerusalem. And there a woman named Martha opened their home to him. She had a sister called Mary. And how sweet. These two sisters. They have a brother named Lazarus. And they become friends with Jesus, and they invite him into his house. Not only invite him for a meal, but basically, hey, stay with us. And Mary and Martha apparently are getting ready for Jesus' visit or his extended visit, preparing a meal, whatever. Mary and Martha are working. At least both of them apparently are supposed to be working. Martha is working, but Mary sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. It probably started out as a casual conversation. One thing leads to another. Next thing you know, Mary's mop and bucket are posed by the side of the wall, and she is sitting at Jesus' feet, and she's asking all sorts of questions. Well, Jesus, what about this? What about this? And they're having a great conversation. That's great. But Luke says, verse 40, Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. Distracted with much serving. Distracted probably to the point of tears. So much work to do, so little time, and so little assistance because the sister of mine isn't helping, and you can just kind of feel the tension and the frustration building up in Martha. And finally, she comes to Jesus. She asks, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me. You can just see that. You can just hear the tone in her voice. Probably that came out a little bit more forceful than maybe she intended. Maybe she sounded a little bit more rude, a little more angry than she intended. Maybe that started out as, maybe I can help get Jesus or ask Jesus to help Mary to help me. I remember for the longest time I would read this and I'd think of Martha as this very uptight, very unpleasant woman. You know the type of person, man or woman, who just they have high expectations and they have certain expectations for you, even if they didn't know you 5 minutes before. And if you don't meet those expectations, if you don't measure up in some way, they get this little expression on their face, like this, or an expression, kind of an attitude that says, your mother dresses you funny and you smell kind of weird too. Just you just don't measure up. I felt that way about Martha for a longest time, and yet my attitude has softened through the years. When I read this passage, I think that there are a lot of Marthas who, in my life, who've done a lot of work without the attitude. You know, the world runs on people like Martha, a whole bunch of Marthas who see what needs to be done and they get it done, and usually they do it without any recognition. And they basically pull miracles out of their hats in some cases, getting things done, making things whole, making people happy. But you can just feel the frustration. Jesus, I'm doing this all for you. That's kind of one of the implied statements here. Implied, not spoken. Lord, I'm trying to help you. Help me help you by getting Mary off her duff and doing the things that she needs to be doing. Frustration, anger, all understandable. And Jesus doesn't really rebuke her at all. You, you can kind of see him taking her hand, saying, Martha, Martha. Every time I see Martha, Martha, I think of the Brady Bunch and Marcia, Marcia, Marcia. Different story. We're not going to go there. That's for another lesson another time. But Jesus says Martha's name twice, basically for emphasis. Martha, listen to me. But out of sympathy, out of love, out of care, Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things. Yeah, I get that. You got so much to do. Hey, I'm with you on that. But only a few things are needed, or in fact, only one thing is needed. What's that one thing? Well, you have me. You have this opportunity to spend time and find out who I am and what I'm all about. That's probably more important than anything else that's going on. Hey, the house doesn't have to be spick and span. You don't have to be serving the perfect meal. We can order out. I've got a Grubhub coupon, just whatever. But even if all you have is just leftovers or maybe whatever, just some day-old bread or whatever, that's fine for me too. You don't need to go to all this trouble. Mary, go ahead. Mm-hmm. Yes? Yes. I think you're right. Martha's kind of on the works team. If I do everything and I do it right, I do it perfectly, I get a gold star. I get God's approval. And maybe she didn't come out and say that at any time, but maybe that was just, that was her mindset. That's the way she had been brought up. Mary is a little bit more laid back, perhaps, but she knows who Jesus is. She gets the sense of who Jesus is, and her motivation, her priority is, I need to spend time with this man. I need to have that relationship. Jesus says, Martha, it's all good. Mary has chosen what is better. She has chosen that good part. She has recognized that loving me and being devoted to me is the really important thing. Not a perfect house, not the perfect 6-course dinner, not the perfect whatever. Those things will pass. Those things have no lasting eternal value. The things that Mary is seeking from me, that is the real value. That is of eternal worth. Mary has chosen the better part, and it will not be taken away from her. So, food for thought. Something to think about. It kind of leads out. Um, this is kind of one of the things that Jesus addresses rather implicitly here, but the that decades long, that centuries long attitude mindset that says you got to earn God's favor, and there are certain things that you do. The original law that's in the scrolls and the Torah and the Ark of the Covenant, whatever. That's too complicated. But follow these man-made rules, which is our interpretation of what God is all about, and you'll get that gold star in your name. You'll get that book. You'll get your name in the book of life. But mess up on any of those things, yeah, you've got to earn. You've got to earn that relationship. You've got to earn your salvation. And Jesus says, not. And that's not the way it is. It's having that relationship with me and what I can do for you, and what I have and will do for you. So that brings us to the end of chapter 10. And that brings us to where on our next lesson, we're going to talk about how to pray in that episode. And Jesus gets into it with some of the Jewish officials, which is not surprising considering the fact that he is so close to Jerusalem. Anyway, if you will, read chapter 11. And that will be the basis of our lesson for next Sunday. I want to thank you for your time. I hope you got something out of the lesson. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a great week. Stay warm. And for those of us football fans, it's coming down to who's going to be in the Super Bowl. And, we figured out early it ain't going to be Dallas, so I've kind of lost interest. But anyway, have a great week. And Lord willing, we'll see you back here Sunday.